It has been a crazy 24 hours in Washington, with former chief medical advisor to the President of the United States, Anthony Fauci, fronting a hearing into the origins of COVID. In the lead up to the hearing, Fauci's pandemic-era diary notes were released by Senator Rand Paul, a strong critic of Fauci's. In his post on X, Paul said, "For years I've said Fauci's public story and his private notes don't match. Now we have the receipts. 1,000 plus pages of his own diary showing that the wet market was off the table in his mind, even as he downplayed the possibility of a lab leak." But all of this was just the setup for the main event, which took place overnight our time. Fauci had been subpoenaed after backing out of an earlier agreement to appear voluntarily. And this is what he said during his opening statement.
Given Senator Paul's obvious obsession with calling for my prosecution, his repeated slanderous comments about me, and recently his publicly releasing my unredacted personal diary aimed at embarrassing and intimidating me, the only conclusion I can reach is that the sole reason he is calling me before this committee is to get me to say something, anything, that could vindicate his repeated public pledges that I end up, in his words, quote, behind bars, unquote. Any reasonable person who has followed his unhinged obsession with me would readily come to the same conclusion. Therefore, although it pains me to do so, because of the respect I have for the legislative branch of government and my decades-long record of cooperating with Congress, under the advice of my attorneys, I will invoke my right under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution to refrain from answering your questions. Thank you.
Now, look, do me a favor. Do not turn this into a drinking game. If you have a drink every time Fauci pleads the fifth, you will not make it through to the end of this segment. You will be under the table. While there's no doubt a lot of beef between Fauci and Rand Paul, refusing to allow yourself to be held to account, well, it's problematic to say the least. Fauci was the medical face of the pandemic. His words resonated around the world, not just in America. He absolutely should be held to account for his response to COVID, good or bad. See, it doesn't actually matter your viewpoint here, whether you think he did a good job or a bad job. What matters here is whether he was saying one thing in public but another in his private diaries. Now, this is the key. We have to know that he was being upfront and not lying to the world. After everything everyone went through during COVID, it is the bare minimum we should be entitled to. Now, Fauci was granted a preemptive pardon by outgoing President Joe Biden in 2025. So you would think he would be free to answer the questions. But it gets complicated because Republicans claim it does not protect him from any alleged crimes committed after it was issued, such as perjuring himself at a Senate hearing. So, of course, if he's got nothing to hide, then he has nothing to fear. But that's not what happened here. The whole hearing became a farce, with Senator Rand Paul deciding to push on regardless.
The American people would like to understand your reasoning, your rationale for why you chose to fund the research in Wuhan. There have been, intelligence agencies, the CIA, the FBI, the DOE, have all come to the conclusion that more likely than not, the virus came from the lab in Wuhan. And so we'd like to know, what was the rationale? What was the discussion? How, what went behind the decision to fund the research in Wuhan? How did you come to the conclusion that a totalitarian country would be capable of doing this in a BSL-2 lab, a lab that lacked the security? What was the reasoning? And are you sorry, basically, for making the decision? Would you, given another chance, say, well, gosh, circumstances now, as I know it, maybe it wasn't a wise thing. Can you explain to the committee why you chose to fund this dangerous research in China?
See, whatever you think of Rand Paul's motives, that seemed like a pretty reasonable question to me. And there are questions to be answered because Fauci did fund research in the Wuhan lab. So does that mean he did not want to acknowledge that that could have been the source of the COVID outbreak? But despite a fair enough question, this was his response.
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution.
And it just kept going, with Fauci giving the same response 111 times.
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution. On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution. On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution. On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Constitution.
You get the idea. That wasn't even all 111 times. I figured you understood what was happening. But it did lead to this farcical scene, which then took a dramatic turn.
Well, nothing says honesty like taking the fifth, huh, Doc? Let's try something. What day of the week is it today?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution.
What color tie you're wearing?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
What color's the carpet in front of you?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
Let's just get one thing straight. You don't have any rights under the Fifth Amendment because you've been pardoned, as you very well know. As the Supreme Court has been clear for a century and more, Brown versus Walker, 1896, when he has been pardoned, he may not stand upon his privilege. You know that. Your lawyers sitting behind you now shifting nervously in their chairs. They know it. This isn't about the Constitution. This isn't about the law. This is about contempt. Contempt for this body and contempt for the American people. But I think I know why you're doing it. It's because you don't want to answer questions. It's because you did all kinds of terrible things. It's because during the pandemic, you got rich, didn't you? You got rich while people were dying, hundreds of thousands of Americans, over 1 million in the end, and you were getting rich. And not only were you doing that, you were using federal employees with taxpayer money to apply for and solicit cash prizes for you personally, cash prizes totaling over $1 million. You did all of that during the pandemic, didn't you? That's a question.
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
It's just absurd. How can Fauci incriminate himself by answering a question about the color of his tie or the carpet? And with serious allegations being thrown at him, it is woeful not to speak up and answer those allegations. But I tell you, things really came to a head when one senator, he had had enough. He told the story of a mum in Ohio who went to a high school football game. Sitting outside, away from anyone else, she didn't wear a mask, which went against mask mandates at the time. She was arrested, tased, and dragged away by police.
Those policies were put in place because you had moronic politicians that listened to the words of a megalomaniac who was more interested in having met a Kardashian than the suffering of the American people, and that is you. Your advice to communities like that, to idiotic politicians who enforce those rules, arrested that mom for watching a football game with her own family outside. When that story broke, I said to myself, I cannot stand idly on the side and watch this happen. It was about 6 years ago today that I decided I'm going to give up my businesses, sell them all, run for office, run for the United States Senate, Here I am sitting in front of you 6 years later saying, who the fuck do you think you were for doing that? It is a total disgrace what you did to this country. And if my Democrat colleagues are standing there defending you, I hope the voters of the United States of America watch the clips of every one of you doting on a guy who was more interested in being a celebrity than saving American people. I will make it my mission to make certain that every single one of those Democrats who did that will see that clip over and over and over again. Because there is no defense of what you did. You may have had a 50-plus year legacy of public service, but it ends in total and complete disgrace. So let me ask you an opportunity to answer one question. Will you apologize, just apologize, to the people who you harmed through your actions? Will you say, do you have the dignity to just say you're sorry?
On the advice of counsel, I respectfully decline to answer based upon my rights under the Fifth Amendment to the Constitution.
You know, there are people, and the Democrats have said this, that this is nothing but a Republican witch hunt against Fauci. Maybe that's true. It doesn't matter. There are questions to be answered. His diary says things that are different to his public statements. He had conflicts of interest. The world looked to America. The world took his advice. Even outdoors, people were told to wear masks when they weren't around anyone, which you look back and you think, that's just bloody ridiculous. And the idea that a mum who's with her family, separated from everyone else, in a stadium in Ohio watching a football game outside, is arrested for not wearing a mask. And here in Australia, we look to him. You can't tell me that our health officials weren't paying attention to what he was saying. Now, if he stands by everything he said, then there's nothing to fear. But the idea that he's taking the Fifth through fear of perjury, well, that's quite something, isn't it? And really says it all. And look, our feature interview tonight will focus on a decision by New South Wales Police to reinstate police who refused to take the COVID vaccine during the pandemic. I'll be speaking with Ben Falconer, a police officer who was sacked during the pandemic, and John Larter, a former paramedic who has been one of the driving forces behind this reversal. It's going to be a very interesting discussion because we need to think about what we did during the pandemic. It's something we need to take seriously, but that'll be a bit later tonight on McKnight Tonight.